Okay, so some really interesting sports news is taking place right now. The the French rugby union team has gone into isolation due to COVID. Several players, including Dupont, the scrum half, have tested positive. The coach, Fabien Galtier, has tested positive. Servat, the forwards coach, has tested positive. So the game against Scotland is now in doubt. There are concerns that the Six Nations may become severely disrupted because of France going into quarantine protocols. It makes you wonder how they've managed to test positive with the quarantine protocols in place. So that's an interesting one. It'll be interesting to see if the Six Nations resumes and continues next week unaffected, and if the Scotland France game goes ahead and the other games as well. They are the only positive tests that have happened in the Six Nations. The other five nations have had no positive tests. It does raise questions, though, over the protocols in place. Plain and simple. In other rugby news, in rugby league news, Israel Folau did a video last night on his requesting to return to the NRL, and the NRL saying that they're only going to allow him to have conversations about a return if clubs are serious on signing him. Now, the St George Illawarra Dragons were in the market to sign him last week. They then withdrew their offer, and there was a large fan reaction saying fans would cancel memberships and turn their back on the game should he sign for them. That sentiment has been echoed across NRL fan bases. Now, we do know that several clubs are interested in Israel Folau. He obviously played last season for the Catman Dragons. It will be interesting to see what happens in the next 2 and a bit weeks before the season starts. We're not that far away from the season starting on the 11th of March. So there's not a lot of time for teams to make roster moves and get him in the squad. Now, St George's next game is the Charity Shield against the Rabbitohs at Mudgee. They've had a really tough trials period in the pre-season warm-up games. They've lost both of them. The last one they lost very heavily. They lost a high-scoring thriller against the Sharks, but they lost their last game against Parramatta quite badly. Their second half, they disintegrated. So there are concerns with the Dragons even before the season starts. They were everyone's favourite to get the wooden spoon. They are a club in crisis. It's a dual venture club. They're on their third coach in a year. They've only made the finals twice, and I think in the last 9 years they are really a middling team at best. They've got injury concerns going into the season, so it'll be interesting to see what happens with the St George Illawarra Dragons. I've got 2 more season previews to do before the season starts, which I'll do tomorrow. But the Dragons is an interesting one. Premier League table is becoming very interesting. Let's just get the BBC Sport website up. Let's get that up. Let's see what sports headlines are breaking now. Everton are beating Liverpool 1-0. Henderson's gone off injured. Southampton Chelsea was a 1-1 draw. Burnley West Brom was a 0-0. And Fulham Sheffield United kicks off in an hour's time. Tuchel gave Hudson-Odoi only 31 minutes, and his statement said he wasn't happy with his attitude. Northampton Saints beat Exeter Chiefs in the rugby union. A few other bits and pieces floating around. Norwich are 7 points clear at the top of the championship. La Liga, leaders Atletico have been beaten by Levante in La Liga, which is an interesting game because Atletico are actually steaming away with the La Liga title, but that is one. Kilmarnock have lost 8 SPL games in a row for the first time. That's a record for them. Eintracht Frankfurt have beaten Bayern Munich. And let's have a look at the ongoing issues with the French national side when it comes to rugby union. So Villiers, the winger, Howes, the prop, and Dupont have tested positive for COVID-19. France's Gabien Villiers and Mohamed Houas have joined Antoine Dupont in testing positive for COVID-19, and there are doubts over the Scotland match in Paris on Sunday next week. The French Health Ministry has said that anyone testing positive would need to remain out of contact with others for 10 days up from 7. So that's the French government's policy. All members of the France squad will be tested again on Sunday when the unbeaten Six Nations leaders will announce a new 31-man training squad for the Scotland game. French Rugby Federation announced scrum half Dupont's result on Friday, with those of wing Villiers and Proculaas revealed today. Head coach Fabien Galthié and assistant William Servat tested positive earlier this week and have been isolating. So that's the big news, is what's happening with the French squad. But no other Six Nations squad has any positive tests. So that in itself is really interesting. The fact they've played Italy and Ireland, they have been doing some travel. No Italian or Irish players have tested positive. No Welsh, Scottish or English players or coaching staff have tested positive. So there has to be a breach in the COVID program somewhere with the French national side. And we'll have to see what other positive tests result, because I do believe there will be more positive tests. They're going to have to bring in some replacement players. Dupont is possibly the best scrum half in the world right now, and he's been very crucial in the French turnaround in the last 18 months to 2 years with their style of play and the results improving. And Fabien Galthié and William Servat have also been instrumental in improving the French team remarkably from where they were under previous coaching regimes. So that is a really interesting situation that's evolving. Not much else has been released by at the moment. We don't know if any others have tested positive as of yet. It wouldn't surprise me if more of the French squad that's currently in the elite 31-man squad will test positive. It is raising some headaches for the Six Nations organisers, because if the France-Scotland game is postponed, yes, there are some rest weeks in there, but again, the flexibility of getting that tournament done on time is now raised into question. Obviously, what happened last year, the tournament was indefinitely suspended and then delayed, and then they finally completed it in the autumn. And the last time we saw any postponements of this scale, if the France-Scotland game is postponed, was back in the mouth pandemic, when 3 Ireland games were postponed at the time, back in 2001. So yes, games have been postponed before in the Six Nations, but it's a rare occurrence. Last year notwithstanding, it only happened once before. So it'll be interesting to see what the organisers do. But France have been given an option to name a new 31-man squad and bring players in. But that is obviously conditional on no more positive tests, and whether the devolved Scottish government will be happy to allow their players to travel to Paris in order to face the French next Sunday. So there's a lot of headaches here for these Six Nations organisers. The Israel Folau situation is really interesting, because I don't know how to put the Israel Folau situation, really. I'm very I think the NRL have got to be pragmatic with Israel Folau. I think they have to look at the pros and cons of allowing him to play in the NRL again. Obviously, the NRL was the first professional sports league to restart play back in May last year, and they had a head start on other leagues, including the AFL. And they were the first league to get their product back on the field and on the TV screens and on streaming services worldwide. So the rugby league in Australia is now the fastest growing sport in Australia. When Israel Folau obviously got fired by Rugby Australia and took them to court over unfair dismissal several years ago, I think 2018, the NRL at the time, under Todd Greenberg, stated that he's going to be deregistered. We're not going to allow him to play. The same with the Super League, where he ended up playing with Catalan a couple of years later. The AFL, another major league in Australia, straight away said, no, we're not going to allow him to play in our league. The AFL has stuck with that stance. So it's interesting. Obviously, Catalan signed him last year, and he played the whole season. Admittedly, it was a disrupted season with COVID, but he did play for Catalan, and he played quite well. Key part of that team. It was a 1-year contract, so he's proven he's still got the physical capability to play first-grade rugby league. The issue is, obviously, he's a free agent, and he wants to play. Now, various reports have come out from Australia in the Australian media concerning the Israel Folau situation. Now, the NRL, Israel Folau, obviously, there was some interest from the Dragons of St George in signing him. That then just disappeared, as I said earlier in the live stream, and nothing came of it. Then there was, let's just get the pop-up chat sorted. There. Then St George obviously withdrew their offer of a contract. They were clearly in talks. Israel Folau at the beginning of the week then requested a meeting with the NRL in regards to being able to have meetings with clubs about a return to play in Australia. The NRL said at that point, so they declined the offer for a meeting. At which point, a few days ago, they said they would consider a meeting with Israel Folau if actual clubs that are interested in signing him are serious about signing him and are putting offers on the table. We have just over 2.5 weeks till the season starts. It will be interesting to see what happens. Obviously, we covered the background of the Israel Folau case, but it's already causing division within fan bases on social media. The St George fan base basically said we would rip up our season tickets, we won't renew our memberships, and we will turn our back on the game. That's something the NRL, I think, has to be deeply concerned about. Is they're growing rapidly right now in fan base. More people, casual sports fans, are deciding to look at rugby league for their fix rather than other sports. And the NRL's got to weigh up the pros and cons. Yes, he's a superstar player. He's proven it in 3 different codes of football. He's proven it in Aussie rules to an extent. He gave it a go. He wasn't overly successful, but he still proved he could be a cross-code player. He's obviously proved it in rugby union with the Australian national side. And obviously he's proven it in rugby league before as well, and after his stint in rugby. So he's proven he can play the 3 footballing codes other than association football. He's a supreme athlete. He's a superstar player, but then he is a very controversial figure. Now, I'm of the opinion he should be allowed to play because the NRL has backed itself in a position where it has allowed players to come back into the game who have been deregistered for far more serious offences, including criminality, than what Israel Folau did. Now, I don't agree with what Israel Folau said. I don't agree with some of his personal views. But at the same time, I do believe he should be allowed to play. His time at Catalan, there was one incident in the first game for Catalan where he refused to take the knee during anti-racism protests, and he refused to come out and comment afterwards to the media. But otherwise, his social media content was pretty quiet, and he played very well on the field, and there was no real controversy with him while he was at Catalan. So I can't see, the NRL has got to weigh up his options. As I said in the video last night, they've got to weigh up the pros and cons of allowing him to sign with a club. They have stated clubs have to be serious. And from what I've seen on the reaction on social media about St George fans basically threatening to refuse to renew their memberships and to refuse to attend games, because fans are allowed in attendance in Australia, the financial impact would be felt by a lot of clubs. If he was to sign with a club, fans have basically said similar things on social media. Now, it has divided fans and society as a whole, but on a fan's point of view, considering that there's not allowed at the moment full attendance, but a percentage of attendance, so they're allowing fans in, but not in full attendance. It will be interesting to see what happens with Israel Folau. Evening, Mr. Hansen. How are you? You haven't commented as much lately. Celtic's troubles this season. Shall we discuss them? Celtic, very similar to Liverpool. They've had some record-breaking seasons, and now they're not doing so well. I don't know what's happening with Celtic. It will be interesting to see who they get to replace Neil Lennon. What we do know is Neil Lennon's going to be manager until at least the end of the season. They're not going to make a managerial change now. It will be interesting to see what happens in the summer with Celtic. Very interesting to see what happens in the summer with Celtic. I think it's going to be... Celtic situation is very much like Liverpool, except there's a difference. Celtic haven't been hampered by injuries as much. Liverpool have. Liverpool have been hampered by. I did a video on how long Lennon has, and then the Celtic board came out and said, "No, we're going to keep him as manager." He's in an unenvious position. The Celtic position isn't great. They're not going to win the league. the gap between them and Rangers and the closing gap between them and Hibs and Aberdeen aren't that far away. I mean, Aberdeen have had a bit of a shaky bit of form, but Hibs could quite easily leapfrog Celtic by the end of the season. The gap that Rangers have got is huge. Hibs are sniffing down, hunting down Celtic. If Aberdeen can correct their sliding form, they won today against Kilmarnock, but if they can correct their sliding form, they could overtake Celtic. I believe Everton are still 1-0 up, and Jordan Henderson has gone off injured, so that's another injury headache for Jurgen Klopp. But then you have to look at the transfer market in January, how quiet it was. It really surprised me. With I knew that the transfer market would be suppressed; it would be quieter than normal, but I was really surprised. It's still 1-0 to Everton. Richarlison has scored. Henderson's gone off injured. Let's have a look. Let's see what else is happening in the football. I know, yeah, Henderson limps out of Derby to add to injury problems at Liverpool. Kilmarnock lose a record 8 in a row in the SPL. They lost 1-0 to Aberdeen. Let's have a look at the Scottish Premiership. So let's have a look at the table. Let's find the table. Where's the table? Where's the table? Let's find the table. So let's have a look, see where the teams are. Okay, so Rangers are top with 79 points. Celtic second with 64. Hibs dropped back a bit with 52, and Aberdeen have got 48. That's your top four. Livingston have got 40, St Mirren 35, Dundee United 34, St Johnstone 33, Motherwell got 28, and Kilmarnock have slipped to 10th. They're ahead on goal difference over Hamilton Academical, both for 24 points, and Ross County are last with 23. So the relegation battle in Scotland is going to be very interesting with 3 clubs. The stunning thing with Celtic is they've got a very good goal differential. It's not as if they're doing badly this season. They're really not. The difference is they've lost games Rangers haven't. They've drawn more games than Rangers. They've won less games than Rangers. And their goal difference is a plus 42, so they're scoring goals. But Rangers' goal difference is a plus 61, and Celtic have dropped points in 10 games. Rangers have dropped points in 4, and it was 4 draws. So Celtic have not got a great record. And then Hibs themselves have won 4 less games than Celtic, the same amount of draws, but they've lost 4 more games. So that's the difference between Celtic and Hibs is 4 defeats. I honestly, Hibs and Aberdeen, I think there is a chance to close the gap. Hibs especially, but I think Celtic might have enough of a points buffer over Hibs. But you can see the power shift has definitely happened. Rangers under Gerrard, people are slagging off. Oh, it's a soft league, it's a weak league. Yeah, it's not one of the top 5 leagues in Europe. There's no denying that with the Scottish league. But Celtic's dominance has been partly, I wouldn't say manufactured. I think there's a term for it. Celtic's dominance has partly been aided by the fact that Aberdeen don't have the same financial muscle, and that Rangers obviously had to start from the bottom tier of professional football in Scotland for a period of time after their liquidation. So Celtic's dominance has been artificially assisted. At the same time, I don't know. I don't know with Celtic what's going wrong. There's clearly mismanagement there. There's clearly they've got things wrong. And Hibs aren't a million miles away. A couple of results different. Celtic are 3rd or 4th. Yeah, I think that they had that pre-Christmas carnage where they just couldn't win games and they went on a really bad run. And in disrupted seasons like last season and this season, you can't afford to have bad runs, because what we've now found out in England is the National League North and South has been null and voided. The National League, which is the old conference, is still going for now. So that's 2 more leagues in English football that have been null and voided. The issue is if you get to about 75% of the season completed, that's where points per game comes in. That's where win percentage comes in, and a whole host of other permutations that could affect promotion, relegation, and all sorts. But with Celtic, yes, you've started to pick up wins again, but I think the damage has been done by firstly The start of the season was not great. Then they went through a really rough patch. Europe and domestically just went off the rails. And now you've suddenly got a bit of form. The thing is, you've allowed a gap to appear. And in a league that is a lot less competitive, that might have actually helped Celtic keep second. If, let's say, Celtic and Rangers, let's say the Premier League, Liverpool, with their complete collapse this season. No, I think Klopp has got some personal issues. Obviously, his mother passed away over Christmas, couldn't attend the funeral. I think part of the problem with Liverpool is they haven't adequately got the depth to cover injuries, and players are playing tired and injured. There are players playing for Liverpool that have played a lot of football, and they are playing tired and injured. They haven't got the depth. Their transfer policy has somewhat been exposed. Other clubs are going through the same thing. There are other clubs that have taken that next step as well and improved. Man City, they have the money. They can just buy players in if they want. Clubs like Leicester and Man United. Man United have been going through a rebuild phase for 7-8 years now. Shows how good Alex Ferguson was as a manager when in the last few years he was there. The squad was pretty average. Man United under Solskjaer finally turned the corner. It took them a while. They were caused to sack him early on. And when Jurgen Klopp took over to where he is now, they're still better than what they were when Klopp took over. So he's left the team in a better position. They had 3 good seasons in a row. You don't become a bad team overnight. They're not the only team having a struggle this season. Sheffield United, another club that are massively underperforming from where they were last season. We can accept that. West Ham, a club that are clearly overperforming this season. They're doing much better than predicted. They're fighting for European places. No one predicted West Ham to be where they are in the table. So there's some teams that are playing below themselves and some teams that are overperforming. And then you've got teams like Chelsea, for example. In my opinion, they've sacked Lampard and they've gone with Tuchel, who's known to be a very prickly character, who does fall out with players and backroom staff like that. I can't see Gerrard going to Liverpool just yet. I think he wants to build something with Rangers where they can win the title and then defend the title next year and do well in Europe, which they are doing well in Europe. They haven't lost a game all season. So in that, I think they've lost 1 game, I think, in the Cup this season. League-wise and European competitions, they haven't lost a game this season. So Rangers, I think Gerrard's building something that I think he wants to continue to build. He's got the backing of the board. The players love playing for him. He loves coaching the club. I can't see a move now being a good move for Gerrard. I really can't. I think he wants to earn his stripes. I think he wants to win silverware with Rangers to prove that he can win with a club that has been in the doldrums for a while. He has transformed that team. And I can't see him going into a Liverpool side. I think the owners have not come out and said, "Oh, we support Klopp" or anything like that, which is normally a sign that manager's on the way. I think the ownership does support Jurgen Klopp. I think in the summer they're going to reassess their squad. They have to. I think eight different teams have led the Premier League this season. 8 different teams. That's mad. It's sort of settled down now, but there was a period where the lead was changing daily. And Everton are not a bad side. Let's be clear on that. Under Ancelotti, Everton are looking dangerous in the league and are massively improving from where they were. Let's not underestimate Everton here. But yes, Liverpool have got issues. But they're still in the Champions League and they can still win a trophy there. And if they win the Champions League with a disappointing league season, they put some gloss on it. It's get bloody hot. But no, I think Klopp's job's safe. I think the only way he's out of a job at this point is if he walks away. I don't think he's fallen out with the board. I don't think he's really lost the dressing room. I think that's again unfair media speculation, which I think is completely unnecessary. And the British sports media, in fact, the British media in general, are a pretty toxic bunch. I find them abhorrent, to be brutally honest. The way they've singled out certain players and certain managers, and the amount of crap they print, the amount of times you listen to some of the interviews of ex-players going, "I never did this, never did that," but they're reporting that I did certain things. They're there are certain media publications who are much better in their writing and their interviews and the respect they have between the dressing rooms of players and coaches and team officials. And there are certain publications and websites that are vile in what they print. I think, Liverpool are having a down season. But yes, they have won the league for the first time in 30 years. But it's harder to dominate the English league system now than what it was when Liverpool were at their dominance for a 20-year period. And Man United for like a good decade and a half. It is harder to dominate a league these days, which is why we've seen so many Premier League winners. But yes, they still have a chance in the Champions League. They've got the away goals. The Chris Eubank life stories. I avoid Piers Morgan like the plague. I'm not a fan of Piers Morgan. This is a journalist. Okay, this is a media personality who printed some of these people he interviews with the life stories. He smeared in his media publications for the Daily Mirror, I believe. He absolutely trashed people's reputations, and now he wants them to sit down and be all friendly, have a chat with them. I cannot stand Piers Morgan. When he was in charge of the Daily Mirror, some of the stories that were printed on his editorial watch were disgusting. Absolutely disgusting, vile, especially about sports stars that he's got on his life stories. He printed stuff about Freddie Flintoff, has him on the show. And I've watched a few of the episodes of Life Stories with Piers Morgan, and yes, I think you have to take it with a pinch of salt. I'm not a massive fan of Piers Morgan. I think he's a pretty vile individual, but that's the British media for you. It's a pretty toxic industry. Is the British media industry? There's some great journalists in there, but at the same time, the way they treat, especially sports stars. I mean, they are human beings, professional. They are human beings. It's their job. That's what internal performance reviews are for. If you're having a bad season or a bad bit of form, you have an internal performance review. You figure out with your coaches or with your teammates or with the board what's going wrong. When the media start printing and publishing articles, a lot of which are completely unfair, and there's ulterior motives, it doesn't sit well with me. It doesn't. It really doesn't. And don't get me wrong, I'm a diehard sports fan. There are some sports that, are my lifeblood. Football, for me, it has lost some of its luster. It's lost some of its connection with me. And I know we can't go to stadiums right now. We can't go to games, and that is obviously, part of the situation at the moment with where we are. Even when we were able to go to games, I haven't been to a football match in over a decade. I haven't been to a football match since I was a teenager. I'm in my 30s now. I haven't been to a paying match goer for, I think, 14, 15 years because it's unaffordable. I found the same with rugby unions going the same way. And ice hockey's not as expensive to get tickets. It's just getting there by public transport for me at the moment. The public transport's just too expensive. So for match-going fans, when they set ticket prices, these clubs I don't think they take into account the travel costs associated with getting to games. You have to cherry pick where you go, and that's something that I think the media should be reporting on. Is like, okay, this is the state of play when it comes to fans going to games. And unfortunately, a lot of sports teams, and I think rugby union's going the same way, it's becoming rich man sport with the working man, the working family. You might have supported your club for your entire life. You might be lucky if you see about 4 games actually in the stadium of the team you support. You might be lucky. I mean, I have seen Blackburn play, and I don't live in Lancashire. I have been lucky to catch one a few away days because it is ridiculously difficult, A, to get away ticket allocation, and then if you finally do get a hold of some tickets, you got to get to the ground. And one of the games I was going to see with a mate when it was Blackburn Fulham in the Premier League about a decade ago, I called off because of the weather, and we weren't season ticket holders, so we weren't given first preference for the rearranged fixture for tickets. And that is frustrating It is frustrating and it's expensive. I don't know what the average ticket price is going to be post-COVID, um, but I will be doing a video on what I think pro sports will look like post-coronavirus. It's going to be very interesting. I think ticket prices are going to be key. Media right deals are going to be key. There's going to have to be structural reforms and player salaries. This is going to be the big one. Player salaries will have to drop. Player salaries long term will not grow as fast, or they will be forced to drop. And if there's a salary cap system, because a lot of leagues around the world have salary cap systems, we already are seeing the effects of. I just found out that Lambert Butler. It's not a good smoke. I smoke Cutter's Choice. It seems to last quite a long time. I don't think I should be advertising tobacco usage on YouTube, but this is the thing. So let's say you talk about tobacco. Let's say you want to go to a Celtic Aberdeen match. Celtic Rangers is just across Glasgow. Celtic Aberdeen. Let's say when fans are allowed back into stadiums, or Celtic Hibs. So the two teams just behind Celtic in the league. You've got to work out how much it's going to cost to get to either Aberdeen or Edinburgh by train, most likely, if you don't drive. Then after that, you've then got to get to the ground. And I'm not sure how far Hibs is from Waverley Station or Aberdeen from the whatever station Aberdeen, the main station Aberdeen is. How far it is from the transport hubs to the ground? Do you have to walk? Do you have to get a taxi? Do you have to get a bus? Most likely the police will be there, so you'll be escorted in a police escort, but even so. Then you've got food and drink, your concessions. It adds up. So I don't know what the average price is for a ticket in the SPL. I really don't. I haven't looked into the average ticket prices in Scotland. I know in England they're a lot higher, partly because player salaries are higher as well. And what we have seen is, and what we will see is the debate about player wages. I've been discussing this for a while now. Is player salaries in a lot of sports are too high? They're too high. Player salaries. They're far too high. Some leagues have dealt with the COVID pandemic and player salaries very, very well. They've had very good discussions between the players' associations and the leagues and the clubs about, in the short to medium term, salary caps or wages not going up, or wage reductions or wage deferrals. Other leagues, it's been a bit more haphazard. And in European football, it's been really an absolute shambles when it comes to wages and salaries and how much the players give up and how much players, get paid. The whole thing continues. What we will definitely see is ticket prices will be interesting. What clubs will set their ticket price at? Because I think, excuse me, what is going to be very interesting is when we are allowed back in stadiums in large numbers. So the Rugby League World Cup is probably going to be one of the events where we're allowed in large numbers. Maybe the Euros, if we can travel, is what the ticket price is going to be. Nothing worse than seeing people hype up players' teams after beating the bottom of the league. I hate players celebrating like they've won the World Cup after beating the worst team. It depends on the situation. If you've been on a losing streak or you've had a bit of a wobbly bit of form. Oh, Dortmund v Schalke. Dortmund's a young team. Schalke are just in a complete, utter bit of carnage. I think Schalke are really in trouble. These Dortmund players, I think the fact it's the joy of play. I don't know. I think when the scoreline gets to a certain point, celebrations sometimes get a little bit much. We saw that at the Women's World Cup a couple of years ago with the US. I think I don't know. You got to the competitive nature. And for some players, it's I've got my first goal or I've got my first assist, and I'm getting some positive personal stats. The team might have been going for a rough patch, first win for like 4 games. I don't mind players celebrating. It's the explosion of joy is something. Schalke are in a mess. One of the most historical teams in German football. A lot of trophies in their trophy cabinets. They're not a bad side. Historically, they're not a bad team. Same with Hanover SV. Every team goes through a spell where they're not successful. A lot of Man United fans forget they were in the old second division for a lengthy period of time. Aston Villa fans will remember they slipped out the old first division in the 80s at one point. Arsenal have not always been in the top flight. Some teams have really gone through some dark days, and a lot of fans do forget that Man City almost fell into the fourth division when they were playing up the old main road in the late 90s. They really tumbled through the leagues at one point. Man City are where they are now because they've got unlimited wealth. But even when the Arab takeover, the Sheikh Mansour takeover in 2007, they couldn't win trophies for several years. They were a middling side that had many financial, they just couldn't spend their money wisely. Yeah, Bayern Munich, they're not as invincible as what they once were. There are some cracks appearing in their invincibility, which is a good sign, I think, for German football as a whole, that other teams win trophies. That is crucial. And when Eintracht Frankfurt won the German Cup a couple of years ago, that's one of the most popular videos on the channel because German football fans were like, thank God it's not longer Bayern winning everything. And yeah, Bayern Munich have won most of the Bundesliga titles in the last decade. Bayern won't win every title. That is something that needs to be remembered. Yes, Bayern Munich have dominated, but their domination is coming to an end. Other teams are taking that next step, and the German system is such that it's only so long that Bayern can be at the top. They weren't always the top team, and they won't always be the top team. And it is nice. Yeah, Eintracht Frankfurt aren't a bad side. They're a very, very well-known side. And getting a new winner of the German Cup this year is I think, crucial for German football. Absolutely crucial. And yeah, I think their dominance is starting to come to an end, which I think for football fans, I think is for the general neutral, I think is very, very good, very important. I've got to do some more history videos of German football because Borussia Mönchengladbach were a dominant side in the 70s. They're not now, but they were. They won more trophies than Bayern Munich did in the 70s. I've done a video on that years ago, but I've done a video on that. I think football is at a crossroads. I think that's the sport I'm really going to be looking at post coronavirus, and we have some normality and we have a normal season and FA Cup replays coming before the third round begin. Football is the sport at the biggest crossroads at the moment. The way they've handled player wages, the way they've handled a whole host of things. Everton haven't won at Anfield for a long time. It's not 19. I think it's 1990. I think the last win. It's been a good period of time. Their last win was, I think, 99. Kevin Campbell scored the goal. So Everton's record since the 90s hasn't been great against Liverpool. The Merseyside derby has been dominated by one side. Again, I think there's power shifts. Liverpool are the most successful side in English football historically. But you just look at the Premier League era, they've won one Premier League title. In my lifetime, they've won the league once. Leicester and Blackburn have won the league as many times as Liverpool in the last 30 years. So Liverpool were the most dominant side in the 70s and 80s. They had their purple patch. Because English football is far more competitive with who wins league titles, and you look at the history of it, it's more competitive than people realise. The old Division 1 titles as well. You look at teams that have won the old Division 1 and won League Cups and FA Cups. It's a lot more, in domestic trophies, it's a lot more competitive than people realise. I think the League Cup has been devalued, and I think that's something the FA needs to address. I think the FA Cup has also been devalued somewhat. Southampton and Leicester are my dark horses for the FA Cup. That could be a very interesting FA Cup final if all results go the right way and the draw goes the right way. If Southampton was the FA Cup final, Leicester got the worst record in cup finals. They've lost all the cup finals in the FA Cup that they've played. Southampton have got a 1-1 record in the FA Cup final. They've won one, they've lost one, and both finals were against Arsenal, which is really interesting as well. Arsenal are the most successful FA Cup team. Wenger's the most successful FA Cup manager. The League Cup is a bit more of a lottery when it comes to who wins the League Cup, but domestic trophies do give you a hint on how competitive a league structure is. The English league structure is far more competitive, I think, than people realise historically. And there are some teams that have dominated for their own purple patches. I mean, Aston Villa had a very good side at one point. Liverpool, obviously, in the decades before I was born. Manchester United in the decade since I've been born. Arsenal had a period of dominance where they were winning the majority in a certain period. And then the Abramovich era with Chelsea, they've won a fair few trophies. But before Abramovich, they won a handful of trophies. They weren't a very competitive side. But English football is far more competitive than I think people realise. Far, far more competitive. Unfortunately, the way modern football is, a lot of fans there's a disconnect, and that is a fair criticism. And post-pandemic, or when we get back to some kind of normality with fans in stadiums again, and a normal regular season without disruption, it will be very, very interesting. It'll be very interesting, as I say, to see what football looks like in the next 5 years. Chelsea are a strange one. They are seeing that you can't just buy star players and make them a team. The Chelsea model is win now. There is no scope for giving a manager time to build a new philosophy or a system, as Lampard has found out. Tuchel is known to be a prickly customer. He's won trophies at Dortmund, he's won trophies at PSG, but he didn't stick around very long at either club. Couldn't win the German league with Dortmund. Won 2 leagues with PSG, but PSG are now post Tuchel not doing as well with Pochettino. There's issues there. The French league is more competitive this year, which is a positive. Hudson-Odoi lasted 31 minutes. There's clearly Tuchel is known to be a very prickly, difficult character to work for and with. His time at Mainz, where Klopp started his managerial career, is interesting. We've discussed Gerrard possibly going to Liverpool. I don't think that happens. I think he's happy with Rangers. I think he wants to build something at Rangers. Obviously, he wants to win the title this year. He wants to do well in Europe, which they are, and they have a chance of actually doing something in the Europa League. So let's not count them out just yet from going to another Europa League final. They could do that. And I think if he wins trophies, he wants to defend those titles. I don't think he's ready to leave Rangers yet. I think he's very happy where he is. On the Lampard side of things, he was the wrong manager at the wrong time. 5-10 years down the road, when he's built his managerial career up a bit and he's had a bit more success and a bit more development as a manager, absolutely. I could see Lampard being a very good fit at Chelsea in years to come. But we've discussed, Gerrard and Rangers. I don't think he leaves Rangers just yet. I think he wants to continue to build his reputation and continue to build his team. They're going to win the league, but I think he wants to possibly do well in the Europa as well. I don't think the Gerrard Rangers story is finished. I think he stays there for a couple of seasons at best. Another couple of years. I can see him really wanting to cement himself at Rangers and build something there, which will help with his confidence as a manager, because he's got some difficult characters to deal with at Rangers. Just because it's a lesser league doesn't mean there's some big egos in their dressing room. He's managing some difficult players very, very well. Celtic, we've discussed their situation very similar to Liverpool. Celtic have turned their form around a little bit, but I think they're leaving it too late. Damage has been done, and the Lennon situation, while he's won, I think, the Scottish League Cup this season, which helped turn their season around a little bit. At the same time, he's been hung out to dry, and we don't know what's going to happen next season with Celtic. On the side of what Lampard and the Chelsea transfer policy, yes, I don't know how much control the managers actually have over transfer policy. That's something that needs to be looking at. So Chelsea's transfer policy is something that a lot of clubs, same with Manchester United, transfer policy, you have to ask questions about who's in charge of it. Is it the manager having final say, or is it a chief scout, which is perfectly fine if you say to your chief scout, I want you to scout me some players. We need a player in this position. We need a player in that position, a player in this position. Here's my preferentials. If we can't get them, here's my second list. That's a good way to work transfer policy. Is a manager going to his chief scout and his chief recruiter going, we have issues in these areas. We would like to improve, let's say, a centre-back, defensive midfielder possibly, a winger, striker, or a box-to-box midfielder. Can you find me these players? Here's my preferential list if they're available. If we can't get them, here's my secondary list. And we can work developing that player. That seems to me as like how most managers would work their transfer policy. They would work with the club chief scout. They would work with the scouting department. They will work with recruitment. But at Chelsea and at Man United, I think have figured it out. It's taken a lot of missteps, and Ed Woodward is still not a very popular figure with Man United fans, regardless of how they're doing in the league. He never has been. On the Chelsea side of things, their transfer policy, I scratch my head with it. I really scratch my head with transfer policy at Chelsea. I'm not sure how much say Lampard had. I'm not sure how much say Conte had, Mourinho, Ranieri by the end, when Abramovich first took over. I'm not sure how much say Ranieri had in transfer policy by the end. But we'll have to see what happens with Chelsea. I'm not so sure Tuchel will be that successful with the club. The way they handled the Lampard sacking, they won their last game at Luton, against Luton in the Cup. So that decision had been made before the game because of quarantine protocols for overseas travel, with Tuchel coming from France. Sorry, again, you have to build a philosophy. You have to build a good core that you keep from season to season. There's not a lot of Chelsea players there that have been there a very, very long time. I wouldn't say the German players that have been, Werner, for example, he's a good player. He's playing in the wrong system and he's playing without confidence. And a lot of that is to do with media speculation, the way his transfer has been handled. I think I'm not sold on Tuchel just yet. But from what reports I've read, the way it fell apart at Dortmund, the way it fell apart at PSG, there were clubs in very strong positions when he left. He won silverware with both teams. He made Dortmund more competitive in the German league. Yes, they won, I think, a couple of domestic trophies, but they didn't win the league itself. But he's known to have he's difficult to work with. Players have said he's really not necessarily the best manager. And openly criticising a player to the media after a game is not a great way to build a rapport with the squad. Now, if Hudson-Odoi is a popular member of that team, that could have a negative impact in the dressing room. If he's not a popular player with the team, he might go the other way. But Hudson-Odoi is a Chelsea product through and through. He's played for several managers. He, ironically, is one of the longest-serving players with the club. I think I'm not sure what's happening at Chelsea. I'm not a Chelsea fan. I mean, I have subscribers who are, who fill me in with this. I've got a good friend. My mate Sam is a Chelsea fan. He was absolutely gutted by the Lampard sacking. He did say Lampard needs time. They need to completely overhaul the squad. They need to look at tactics and formations, and in order to overhaul the squad, the manager will need more say on transfers. And from what has sort of come out of Chelsea from every ex-manager is the transfer policy is not in their hands. They don't have final say, which to me is crazy. But I'm trying to compare football to other sports and the English Premier League to other leagues. Normally, there's a good communication between a coach and a general manager or a chief scout where they're looking at the makeup of their squad, they're looking at the makeup of their roster. And if you've got a salary cap system, you might have to sacrifice a good player. to get under the cap. But I think I don't know. I mean, I have several Chelsea fans who subscribe to the channel. A good friend of mine is a Chelsea fan, and he's not sold on Tuchel either. He's not happy with how the Lampard era ended, and that is a fair criticism, the way the club handled it. But at the same time, the Hudson-Odoi situation, well, I haven't seen the game and I haven't seen the post-match interview. I've read reports. He lasted 31 minutes, brought off. Same with the Kepa situation. There's clearly issues within that playing squad. There's clearly an ununited dressing room in that dressing room at Stamford Bridge. I don't think any manager has fully got the players as a united unit. I think Mourinho came close. I mean, the first time I think Mourinho had that united unit. I think Ranieri had that unit to a point, because the Mourinho squad was built on the basis of the Ranieri squad when Abramovich bought the club. But as time has gone on, you look at the second time Mourinho was in charge, it was a shambles. Conte turned that team around, and then he still got sacked, and he won trophies in back-to-back seasons. This is the problem with Chelsea. They've got this win-now mentality. Coming runner-up isn't good enough. Even if you win another domestic trophy or do well in Europe, it's still not good enough. Every manager that's won a trophy has been sacked. Let's put that out there. The average tenure is between 9 and 18 months. So a season to 2 seasons. Conte was on a 3-season contract, lasted 2. Lampard, similar contract, lasted a season and a half. There's no long-term stability. This is where I think Liverpool with Klopp, I don't think they sack Klopp. They will have a post-season assessment of the situation, and they're going to have to look in the transfer market. I think Pulisic is a good player. He is young, but the injuries are mounting up, and that is a concern. Werner is not a bad player. I've seen him play for Dortmund. He's not a bad player at all. But I think the system isn't working for him, and his confidence is shot to shit. Ancelotti and Di Matteo and Rafa Benitez all won trophies at Chelsea. All of them. Di Matteo hasn't really done much in management since then. Benitez and Ancelotti, I'm sorry, you just have to look at their track record. They're good managers. It's the board that was the problem. Personally, I think there's a toxic governance to the team. The way the organisation is run is a toxic atmosphere of fear, I think, and suspicion, and I don't think it's a healthy working environment. The Kepa situation, well, I think this is where I think the squad isn't united. There's factions within the team, and there's a lot of big egos there. And while Chelsea, under Abramovich, I think it's only been 2 seasons where they haven't won a trophy, or 3 seasons. They've had 3 trophyless seasons or something since 2004. They have been a constant trophy machine. I think the wheels are starting to come off with that win now mentality. They need to refresh the squad. They're not going to be winning trophies or competing for trophies every season. It's just facts. Every team goes through it. Every team goes through downswings. Starts Man United fans, ask Liverpool fans for the last 30 years. Yes, they won FA Cups and League Cups and Champions Leagues and Europa Leagues in there. But you ask Liverpool fans since 1990 till last season, they didn't win trophies every year. There was a long period where they won nothing. So it's a simple fact that each team will go through a period where they're less successful. The Chelsea model is unsustainable. If Chelsea was a standalone club, they would be bankrupt. They would be in serious financial difficulty. It's just because their owner is exceptionally wealthy that they can continue to spend at such a rate. Same with Man City. Man City, when they don't make as much money as people realise. It's because their owners are exceptionally hideously wealthy. the football finances, it's an interesting topic, and I think post-pandemic, ticket prices will be key. The TV deals and the media deals that the Premier League and the EFL sign will be interesting. We know the FA Cup's going to be completely on free-to-air TV from next season. BT Sports lost the rights to the FA Cup, which is significant. Yeah, I mean the Etihad situation and trying to get round financial fair play rules and Man City's ownership's battle with UEFA. True Man City fans love their club. They've stuck with their club through some very, very dark days in the 90s. They got really bad in the 90s. Oh, yeah. They went, I think it was 1970, was it 1976 to 2011 when they didn't win a trophy or something? They didn't win anything for 30 odd years. It was ridiculous. And even with the money, it took 5 years for them to actually start doing stuff and competing. It took a lot of missteps, and they had to build a team. They had to put some structures in place to make the team better. They went through a lot of managers. I think there's a bit more stability at Man City now with the philosophy going forward, and they're going to be in the mix for trophies for quite some time to come. But at the same time, Man City have gone through a lengthy period where they weren't very successful. Manchester United went through a period where they're not very successful. So it hasn't always been the big six. I mean, Tottenham haven't won anything since 2008. Their class is one of the big six. The last time they won the league was 1961. The last time they won the League Cup was 2008. They haven't won anything for a very long time. Their class is the big six. Okay. They're still going to win no silverware this season, but okay. I can't see Tottenham winning any silverware at any point. If I'm brutally honest, they come up short every time. The Leicester have got more chance of winning trophies than Tottenham, and they prove they can. This is going to be a very interesting run into the season. I think Man City's title to lose. They have the experience not to lose it. Oh, well, Ian Brown, Richard Ashcroft, Gallagher's probably. Yeah, I mean, look, as a Blackburn fan, I know what it's like to have foreign ownership that doesn't really understand the club's fan base. And I'm not from Lancashire, but I've supported the club since I was 2-3 years old. The joys of having cable TV. The owners, the Venkeys, don't understand the fan base. They don't understand the community. They're overseas owners. They're in there for it's an ego investment, which a lot of these overseas owners, a lot of it's a tax dodge as well. Yeah, because they will make losses on that write-off against corporation tax. That's the thing. It's an ego investment because other millionaires and billionaires are doing it. We've got to get in on the act. But yeah, I think Southgate as England manager, we'll see what happens at the Euros. I'm not. I don't think Southgate's bad, but I don't think some of his selections make a lot of sense. The fact that Vardy and Cahill at the time after the World Cup said we're not playing for England anymore because even though we're capable of playing for this side, we're not being given a fair crack of the whip, even though we've proven ourselves in domestic football over many years. And look at Vardy still this season. He's still whacking in the goals. He's in his mid-30s. He could still do something at the Euros. I think he'll be a valuable addition. The midfield, I think, there's a lack of experience in that team. On the side of a player having issues with prescription medication and alcohol, that's nothing new. I haven't read the article, but that transcends sport, cross sports. Players having problems with addiction. As I say, they're in a high pressure environment. A lot of them are very, very young and they're in the media spotlight, and their careers are, unfortunately, a lot of them very, 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 very short. That doesn't surprise me that it's come out that players are struggling with addictions and issues of that nature. There is no surprise there. I've covered that before on the channel. When I do, player welfare videos, they don't get a lot of views. It's a major issue. It doesn't matter what sport we're talking about. We could be talking about concussions, repeat injuries, alcohol problems, prescription medication addiction, illicit drug use. Unless it's a superstar player who's done something really stupid. Uh, when I basically do, Paul Gascoigne for me is the highlight of an English player. Paul Merson, another one. Lee Sharp. I mean, these players from my youth, but they're all contemporaries. They're all in around the England squad at the time. Gaza, Merson, and Lee Sharp, all of them had issues with alcohol. Merson's had multiple relapses. Lee Sharp famously, came out and said, "Yeah, I was an alcoholic." Tony Adams was famously playing drunk half the time. I mean, talk about George Best and Maradona, but these are guys who are still alive, who, Gascoigne notwithstanding, have been very open and public about their battles with addiction. They had great careers. Let's not detract from their achievements in the game, but they were very open about. Merson's, I think, an ongoing issue. Same with Paul Gascoigne, but Lee Sharp is another example of an alcoholic player. One of my favourite players growing up, actually, even though he didn't play for a team that I supported. Lee Sharp was one of my favourite players in the 90s. And yes, very open about his alcohol problems. Not the only one in that great Man United side under Fergie in the 90s. There was a lot of players who played for Fergie in the 90s who were drunks. A lot of them had issues with the booze. Paul Merson, yeah, another Ray Parlour is known to have a drink. Lee Sharp, brilliant player, but his career was derailed, not by injuries, but by alcohol. Same with Paul Merson. Paul Merson was a brilliant, gifted player. Alcohol was his undoing. There is no hiding that fact. No hiding that fact. Yeah, it's 20, 30 years ago, but it's still relevant now because Tony Adams has set up his addiction centre. By the time Wenger came into the Arsenal setup, George Graham, and they'd been obviously let go and all that, he'd already gone sober. George Graham had made sure he got himself sober, and sleeping tablets and alcohol are dangerous; they can kill you. So again, that's the player welfare. That's the club. That's the club not looking after their employee. That in itself is a concern that the player welfare officer, which every club should have, is not doing their due diligence and looking after the player. Whether it's actually Chilwell or it's an unnamed player is something to speculate. We know there was another article printed in, and whether this is true or not, that several high-profile English players had been caught using cocaine and amphetamines. We know Danny Drinkwater, his career has completely gone down the toilet, and alcohol is involved in that. Rugby union, Danny Cipriani is a prime example of a player who just cannot stay sober, constantly changing clubs, and then his career, his international career, just went out the toilet. And this is just British players we're talking about. There's a whole host of Scottish players who also had issues with the drink. In the Chilwell situation, if it is him, then I think you have to look at the player welfare officer and the coaching setup and ask the questions like, okay, we know there's a lockdown going on. We know we can't socialise outside the work environment. And I work outdoors on the bins, so therefore I get to see other people every day. But a lot of people haven't got that social interaction with their friends, not face to face, and mental health has taken a kicking. The fact that it would be plainly obvious if someone had an addiction to alcohol and prescription meds, it is actually highly obvious. The physical signs are there. But you've got to be difficult dealing with addiction. It's up to the addict to say, I've got a problem. That's the first step. I've got friends who've gone through Addicts Anonymous. I've done it. I've gone to meetings about issues with prescription and illicit and alcohol. I've done it. But look at me, I'm not a high profile athlete. That's the difference. The issue is when they're in these high profile positions, especially when they're getting thrown a lot of money when they're very young, in their teenage years, they're getting thrown these big contracts. They're in the press spotlight daily. They one slip up, it's on social media. They are under a lot more acute mental stress than your average working man or woman, your average person. There's a lot more acute mental stress. And that has an effect on your sleeping patterns. That has an effect on your eating patterns. That has an effect on the whole range of things. I think I would take the article with a pinch of salt. I do believe there are issues with a lot of players with addiction out there. The high-profile ones are the ones that suffer the most when the media get hold of it, when they are named and they're thrown under the bus. But every season, it doesn't matter what sport we're looking at. It doesn't matter if it's the NHL, the NFL, the NBA, the Major League Baseball, Major League Soccer in North America. It doesn't matter if it's the NRL or Super League and Rugby League. It doesn't matter if it's rugby union, domestic leagues or internationally. It doesn't matter if it's football, tennis, motorsport. James Hunt, there's a prime example of a sporting figure who was a pisshead. He got sober by the end of his life, but unfortunately, because of his partying antics in the previous 20 years, he died young. He was dead by, I think, 43, 44, James Hunt died. He was known for his wild partying lifestyle. It takes a toll. So I think, it's a difficult one. I've done videos on player welfare and professional sports need to do more, and I think the media has a responsibility in this as well. But they don't get a lot of views. People don't care. I don't think there's not enough help out there. I just think the public image of sport, and this is where the Israel Folau comes in. I think with the NRL weighing up, should we allow him to play again? Considering Todd Carney, who ended up playing for Catalan himself, was deregistered by the NRL because he had a lot of drug-related incidents, including driving whilst disqualified, fleeing a scene, resisting arrest. Ben Cousins is another example of a high-profile international sportsman who played in the AFL. There was a documentary done about 10 years ago about his return to play. He was playing for the West Coast Eagles, and the AFL were trying to catch him out with drugs tests and on-spot checks, and they could never get him to fail a test. It was only when he got done by the police outside of the AFL for drink driving that he was finally deregistered. And then during that first season of deregistration, he went completely bananas. But he'd been abusing alcohol, prescription, and recreational drugs for a long time. I think he's gone to prison again now for a drug-related offence. Ben Cousins, seriously, check it out. There's a documentary, the Ben Cousins story. It's about 10 years old now, so a lot's happened since then. He did return to the AFL. He did play very well in his return season, and then he retired again. But there's a lot of that to do with mental health. There were several high-profile Australian players. I mean, the Bath rugby cocaine scandal. There are so many high-profile incidents in UK sport or global sport where you've got Michael Jordan gambling before games. The gambling scandal with the NBA, which involved referees. Mike Ribeiro, high-profile, and Bobby Ryan, two high-profile NHL players. Mike Ribeiro has never returned to the game. Bobby Ryan has. Both had issues with alcohol. There's other players as well who've had issues with a variety of things. Zopiclone. Oh God, that's a banned sleeping pill, if I remember correctly, because I have had to do these, you know, keep yourself aware of what is and isn't allowed. When I was on, I will admit, football players and athletes haven't covered themselves in glory over the last 12 months during this pandemic. They really haven't. But I'm not one to talk about addiction, because I would sound like a hypocrite, because I've been there. There are several players that it could be. Speculation, I don't think, helps the individual themselves. And while I doubt any Premier League football players will be watching my live stream at all, and I highly doubt any professional player would be watching this live stream. But in theory, let's say they were. Speculation doesn't help the situation unless we have hard facts. If no one was actually named in that article, it says that the journalist has approached the club, and the club have basically said, or the players' representative said, "You print that, we'll sue you." It happens. It happens. And this is where we're speculating, because you think it is, and that's fair that you have an assumption it could be. It could be Kyle Walker, because we know what he's done over the last 12 months with his continual lockdown breaches. It could be it could be Grealish for all we know. Another player who's had high-profile drink-related incidents in his career. It would not surprise me if the journalist has had a source, has gone to the player's representative or the club, and the club have said, "You print this, you print names and the club involved, and we'll take you to court." Until a public statement is given by the player or the club that an individual or individuals are going through any kind of situation. I do believe there is a policy of like hush hush. The first two is it's quiet. There's like 3 strike policy, and then we ban you or something. If the player has not failed a drugs test for a prohibited substance, especially if it's on the black market, then. But again, we're speculating. Oh, Dele Alli, or this player, or that player. There's a whole host of players it could be. Could be any one of them. The funny thing is, players like Maradona and Gaza could play steamed and still be the best player on the field. That is how scary it is, how easy it is to hide it for a functioning addict. You look at Maradona, you look at Gaza. Tony Adams, even when he was completely blitzed out of his brain, was one of the best defenders England's ever produced in the 80s and the 90s. There's no question on that. And they've even admitted, especially Tony Adams, that when he was at his peak, he was also, when he was playing his best, was when he was drunk. It turned out he would play better when he was sober, but he thought he was playing his best when he was pissed. And he had some of his best performances throughout his career during his alcohol days. The fact that the player is unnamed, and the fact that an alleged teammate has basically said, my probably a friend, probably why he's concerned, is doing this. So there is knowledge in the playing group of whatever club it is that this player or players, because I bet it's more than one player, if there's a culture of hush hush, we won't discuss this publicly. At the same time, it wouldn't surprise me that a lot of players whose form I'm questioning and their attitude and the way they're playing. It's not just football; it's a whole host of sports. And substance abuse is more common than people realise in professional sport. The fact it isn't an anabolic steroid is, I think, the highlighted issue here. It really is. All right? Really is. What gets me is, why would you publish the article anyway if you can't name the player? Clearly, there's been some kind of legal action taken between the players' representatives of the club or players' agent and the media publication. Now, I haven't read this article, but we know that if they're mentioning someone like Paul Merson and Tony Adams and high-profile players who have actually openly admitted that they've had issues with drugs and alcohol, Paul Merson and Tony Adams aren't going to sue the publication. But I think there's clearly, you say force the player to get help, you've got to be very careful with an addict. because you can make the situation a lot worse, and then it becomes far more damaging, not just for the individual, but other individuals around that person. It can be a far more damaging situation, and have bigger repercussions long term. But this is not a new thing in professional sport. It isn't. Professional cycling's gone through this, where well before the doping era, but we're talking in the 60s and 70s. I think we'll have to see if the story gains any further traction, and if any other news outlets start picking up on it. I'll try and have a dig on online to see what articles are there about players abusing alcohol and sleeping pills. The fact that these, if it's COVID breaches, that narrows it down to a handful of players who had massive house parties, and Carl Walker is one of those players who had several parties during various lockdowns over the last 12 months that were very high profile, especially his Christmas party as well, which then impacted a lot of teams. The parties, yeah. The fact that players aren't being named makes me believe that the clubs of the players involved, and which narrows it down significantly, like Chelsea, Fulham, Man City, and what other club was it that had players breach and go to parties? I think that's it. I think it was Man City, Fulham, and Chelsea. I think they're the clubs you want to be looking at for players, which does significantly narrow it down. And then questions have to be raised about a whole host of issues, including, I think there was some as well involving Scottish football, but it does narrow down the potential scope. But this issue is not a new thing for football or sport in general. It's been going on for decades, decades and decades. If you follow the NHL at any point, or if you're ever interested in the NHL, it was a well-known fact in the 80s that cocaine, amphetamines, and alcohol being regularly abused on an alarming scale. Having a drink after the game is not an unnatural thing in ice hockey, but recreational drug use was a massive problem in the 80s and 90s. The Washington Capitals had some high-profile incidents. The Edmonton Oilers, it came out that the dressing room was just cocaine-fueled nightmare. Several high-profile players were thrown under the bus: Bob Probert and Grant Fuhr. Detroit, and that's at a time when player salaries in that league were not as high as they are now. A lot of teams were struggling financially at the time, but it was on the rumour mill for a long time, and it all came out in the 90s that a lot of players were off their nut. And there's continuing allegations and rumours coming out of rugby union, rugby league, ice hockey, American football, association football, soccer, depending where you are in the world, Major League Baseball. There's continuing rumours circulating that in locker rooms there's a minimum number of players abusing. On drugs tests, it's because sleeping medication is prescribed, and it depends. They're probably more searching for the class A's, the illicit drugs, and they'll be searching for performance enhancers. Sleeping pills do not enhance your performance. Recreational drugs, some of them can have some performance enhancing side effects. This is what the drugs test will be searching for: a variety of things. There's an AFL player who is currently banned because he smokes some cannabis, and the drugs test was specifically designed to find performance enhancing, but he didn't know that, so he changed his urine sample. Admittedly, for a bottle of Gatorade, but he changed his urine sample. He docked his urine sample, believing that they were testing for all drugs. When it comes to professional sport, the drugs test they'll be targeting a specific performance enhancer, there's allegations of a club saying recreational drug misuse, so cannabis, speed, cocaine, ketamine. Then they will be looking at that specific on the test. So there'll be two tests: performance enhancing and recreationals. Because it's a prescription medication that has no performance enhancing, that I believe sleeping pills have no performance enhancing side effects, because some prescription meds can actually, especially asthma medication, can give you some performance enhancing side effects unless you've got a TUE, a therapeutic use exemption. Then that's what the Premier League are looking for. Under the UK anti-doping, there'll be a standard test, and they'll be looking for certain things. If they have evidence of other misuse of drugs, it's a different thing. If it's addiction to painkillers, that doesn't come up on a standard test. Anti-inflammatories will not come up on a test, especially if you've declared them. If the club doctor said, like, your knees a bit swollen this month, you're on rehab, we'll give you some anti-inflammatories to aid the healing and some painkillers. So codeine, for example, that's an opiate. Now, opiates would come up on a standard test. If you declare that, then they can discount the opiates in your system. It's a thing. I'm not the same drug tests apply in the normal workplace. I've seen how they work. I know how they work. I know what they look for. When it comes to regular work like me, they're looking for illicit drugs and alcohol to make sure you're fit to work. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for illicit drugs and alcohol in your system. Professional athletes under the UK anti-doping or world anti-doping, so WADA, and the various national anti-doping agencies, they're looking for performance enhancers and recreationals. Most likely TUEs, they have to be signed off and have an exemption. Things like nicotine, they're not illegal. So if I'm smoking a cigarette, that in itself will come up. You've got nicotine. Yeah, I'm a smoker. They normally do health forms anyway on players. It's well known that a fair few players are heavy smokers in professional sport. It's a thing. It's not unusual. But they are looking for certain items. That's probably why that sleeping medication, some of them can be over the counter, like Nitol, can be over the counter. And that is a grey area when it comes to drugs testing. The alcohol as well wouldn't be a failed test. Wouldn't be a failed test, especially if you're off injured and not training. It reduces your blood pressure, thins your blood, reduces your heart rate, and can lead to cardiac arrest, low blood pressure. Derek Boogaard, that's a prime example of an NHL player who overdosed on prescription meds and alcohol, which shouldn't be taken together. Painkillers and sleeping pills. He died in his sleep. He was 28. So, and there's a documentary on that on Punched Out, it's called on YouTube, the Derek Boogaard story by the New York Times. They look at his last years for the Minnesota Wild and his time at the New York Rangers. Sleeping pills should not be taken with alcohol. Alcohol thins your blood and is a depressant, and sleeping pills obviously send you to sleep. Alcohol also makes you drowsy. Combining the two is exceptionally dangerous. There is this is the thing. There's a lot of speculation about who the player is, obviously, but from what I know of medications, because I've had to take a fair few meds in my time for various ailments, including anti-inflammatories and painkillers, and then that sort of became an issue in itself. You have to read the side effects. There's a whole host of things. So sleeping pills generally should not be taken with alcohol. And there are some medications you shouldn't be taken with alcohol at all because it can destroy your stomach lining, make you really ill. And sleeping pills, they do reduce your heart rate. They reduce your body's metabolism. They slow you down. They try and send you off quite gently to sleep. Alcohol also does that. Alcohol will also make you drowsy, which is why you shouldn't drink and drive, because your reaction time is slowed because you're tired. Mixing the two is exceptionally dangerous. Oh, hang on a sec, someone's ringing the doorbell. I'll be back in a sec. Right, because my block of flats has about 5 billion doorbells. Someone's ringing one of the doorbells and is annoying everyone. Um, can't find the right flat. On the side of prescription medication, this is why the drug test isn't coming up. He could have been prescribed sleeping pills, and therefore it's declared as a therapeutic use exemption. And therefore, if it's declared to the testers, it's not going to come up. They'll discount that straight up. I don't know the Premier League's testing policy, how often players get randomly tested. I know in the NHL they do 2 tests a year. Yeah, there was someone ringing one of the doorbells because we have multiple doorbells for the building, and not all flats have a doorbell, and some idiots just pressing them, which is fucking annoying. Especially when it's ding dong, it's in the background, and you can hear it. And like, well, we've got 3 entrances to the building. Most of the flats are upstairs, and there's 5 flats downstairs, and one of them has a doorbell. It's ridiculous. And it's 8:30. So unless someone's ordered a pizza, I don't understand why the pissing doorbell has been rung like mad. It does my nut in. But no, on a serious point, therapeutic use exemptions, TUEs, which have been heavily criticised in recent years for players bending the rules and finding loopholes to gain an advantage. And there's been a couple of scandals involving TUEs. The interesting thing with them is if you declare them, you have a medical reason. So if you are on insomnia and your doctor has said, look, you're having issues with your sleep, I'm going to prescribe you some sleeping medication or or a medication that helps you settle, and you declare that to the club doctor, and the club doctor then declares that to the UK anti-doping. If it's already on a prescribed list, even as a TU and you can't have it, then you have to go back to the doctor and they have to prescribe something else. The thing is, obviously, the human body is very interesting. People have allergies. People can have bad reactions. So I think upstairs has had a power cut. So we've had issues with our electrics. I'm going to have to call this live stream off, I'm afraid. I think we've had a power outage upstairs. Last night we had power outage downstairs with a massive leak. My neighbour's flat got flooded. So I'm going to have to end the stream early, I'm afraid, because I've just heard my neighbour from upstairs, Jamie, come down because I think they've lost power upstairs. So I'll catch you guys on the live stream tomorrow. I'll have some more videos tomorrow as well. Thank you very much for watching. Apologies for the live stream having to end early, but there is some technical faults with it. My flat's fine. Apparently upstairs isn't, because I've just heard my neighbour come downstairs. Well, I'll have a little dig about this article about the player who may have an alcohol and addiction problem. If no player's been named, then A, it probably validates the story, and B, I think the club or the Premier League or the FA or whatever club he plays for is probably aware of the situation. So it'll be interesting to see what actually comes out if there's any public statements released with actual names and if players are suddenly injured and on the sidelines for a while. Because there's a few players that haven't played regularly in recent weeks and months who aren't actually injured, but they're just on the squad's books. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll have some more videos for you soon.